Daily Words of God. God does not care if man is foolish. He only asks that man be true. In Genesis chapter 22, verse 2, God gave the following command to Abraham. "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and get you into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you of." God's meaning was clear. He was telling Abraham to give his only son Isaac, whom he loved, as a burnt offering. Looking at it today, is God's command still at odds with man's conceptions? Yes. All that God did at that time is quite contrary to the conceptions of man and incomprehensible to man. In their conceptions, people believe the following. When a man did not believe and thought it an impossibility, God gave him a son. And after he had gained a son, God asked him to offer his son. How incredible! What did God actually intend to do? What was God's actual purpose? He unconditionally gave Abraham a son. Yet he also asked that Abraham make an unconditional offering. Was this excessive? From a third-party standpoint, this was not only excessive, but also somewhat a case of making trouble out of nothing. But Abraham himself did not believe that God was asking too much. Though he had some misgivings and was a little suspicious of God, he was still prepared to make the offering. At this point, what do you see that proves Abraham was willing to offer his son? What is being said in these sentences? The original text gives the following accounts. "And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and split the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went to the place of which God had told him." Genesis chapter 22, verse 3. "And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son." Genesis chapter 22, verses 9 through 10. When Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son, were his actions seen by God? They were. The entire process, from the start, when God asked that Abraham sacrifice Isaac, to when Abraham actually raised his knife to slay his son, showed God the heart of Abraham. And regardless of his former foolishness, ignorance, and misunderstanding of God, at that time Abraham's heart for God was true and honest, and he truly was going to return Isaac, the son given to him by God, back to God. In him, God saw obedience, the very obedience that he desired. To man, God does much that is incomprehensible and even incredible. When God wishes to orchestrate someone, this orchestration is often at odds with man's conceptions and incomprehensible to him. Yet it is precisely this dissonance and incomprehensibility that are God's trial and test of man. Abraham, meanwhile, was able to demonstrate the obedience to God within himself, which was the most fundamental condition of his being able to satisfy God's requirement. Only then, when Abraham was able to obey God's requirement, when he offered Isaac, did God truly feel reassurance and approval toward mankind, toward Abraham, whom he had chosen. Only then was God sure that this person whom he had chosen was an indispensable leader who could undertake his promise and his subsequent management plan. Though it was but a trial and a test, God felt gratified. He felt man's love for him, and he felt comforted by man as never before. At the moment that Abraham lifted up his knife to slay Isaac, did God stop him? God did not let Abraham offer Isaac, for God simply had no intention of taking Isaac's life. Thus, God stopped Abraham just in time. For God, Abraham's obedience had already passed the test. What he did was sufficient, and God had already seen the outcome of what he intended to do. Was this outcome satisfactory to God? It can be said that this outcome was satisfactory to God, that it was what God wanted, and was what God had longed to see. Is this true? Although in different contexts, God uses different ways of testing each person. In Abraham, God saw what he wanted. He saw that Abraham's heart was true, and that his obedience was unconditional. And it was precisely this unconditional that God desired. People often say, "I've already offered this. I've already foregone that. Why is God still not satisfied with me? Why does he keep subjecting me to trials? Why does he keep testing me?" This demonstrates one fact: God has not seen your heart and has not gained your heart. Which is to say, he has not seen such sincerity as when Abraham was able to raise his knife to slay his son by his own hand and offer him to God. He has not seen your unconditional obedience and has not been comforted by you. It is natural, then, that God keeps trying you. Is this not true?